Hello, everyone. It's episode 14 of AVD Monthly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got a good crew with me today. Bill Sutton, who is with me quite often on the Citrix podcast side of things, is with me. Bill, how's it going?
Doing well, Andy. How are you? Out of town, I see.
I am in a hotel room in Chicago with intermittent internet access. It bit me pretty hard on the Nutanix podcast a few minutes ago. Hopefully I'm going to work around it this time.
Okay, good.
We've got Rob Shaw with us. Rob is with Microsoft. Rob used to be a AVD MVP or Ninja, right? Isn't that what they called you guys?
We were GBBs, Global Black Belts.
Global Black Belts. Wow, totally made that one up on the fly.
Some sort of martial arts.
Kind of like a ninja. And Rob, you have moved on, but you're still gracious enough to join us and talk AVD. What's your current role at Microsoft cover?
Yeah, so still doing a good bit of AVD as a global black belt. Now, additionally, doing some roles around AVS, Azure VMware Solutions. So being able to run ESX on Azure. So very, very cool and somewhat in tangent to what we've always done, in the VDI realm, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for those who don't know, Rob and I go way back. We worked together at Citrix a decade ago, a little over
Quite
a
while
decade ago
ago
at this point.
Yeah.
And my wife sent a picture of my wife today from 7 years ago, and she looked about the same. I looked much younger. It's happening, man. It's happening fast. So we're lucky enough to have Greg Roberson with us. Greg is with Nerdio, and I've pretty much decided that in my world, AVD equals Nerdio plus AVD, because now that I've seen what Nerdio can do to make AVD even more implementable and manageable and maintainable, I just pretty much always want to put the two together. Greg, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on the webcast. Give you a little bit of background for you on myself as well. As ex-Microsoft employee, was CSA out of the Dallas location, and have done several hundred, if not more, AVD deployments, and have since left Microsoft. I'm over at Nerdio now, doing some work with these guys, and showing a lot of value in the AVD environment with Nerdio, that's for sure.
So you're probably the perfect person to, if I were to say, give me the elevator pitch as to why Nerdio makes AVD better and goes like peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and chocolate together. What would you tell me if we had like 12 floors to go up before I had to get off and never talk to you again?
So quite simply, it's really three things. Ease of deployment. So Nerdio can help you deploy Azure Virtual Desktop, either new or in existing. We can ingest that as well in typically 2 hours or less, have you up and running. We automate a lot of things, all the way from image management to joining Azure files to your environment in an automated process. And then one big aspect for Nerdio is optimizing your cost from an AVD perspective. So we have quite a few auto scale capabilities that go above and beyond some of the scale plans that Azure offers directly in the ARM environment, with some additional flexibility to significantly cut your cost, easily 40-50% right out of the gate, and shows a lot of value in that area.
So is this like a used car lot where you're trying to tell me you're going to save me money by getting this new car? Or I'm just kidding with you. It's I've seen people do it. I've heard lots of people talk about it. So let me flip that over to Rob real quick. Rob, the Nerdio guys is what he's talking about. How much of that's true?
100% true. I can tell you, especially in organizations, sometimes large organizations where it's going to be managed by its own work group, other places where they just maybe they don't have the Azure skills or the VDI skills. It makes it easy. And I can tell you, in the EDU space, we were probably half of the deployments that we did in the EDU space during the COVID epidemic. I would say more than half of them we leveraged Nerdio, because most of them just don't have the staff to be able to build and then be able to run and maintain.
Yeah. And this isn't supposed to be a Nerdio commercial. We're going to move on to the February and March updates for AVD in a minute. But, I run into so many shops that are doing virtual desktops and they're struggling with just making the desktops work right. And when you bring in AVD, you have this new monster of a thing that needs some rounding out. And without something like Nerdio or others, but specifically Nerdio in this case, you really just can't even manage the thing, much less make all the little stuff work like Outlook cache and applications that don't like to be virtualized potentially. You need that helping hand. You just attacking it head on AVD is, I don't want to call it suicide because people do it, but they've got a team of people when they do it like that.
They do.
All right. So the point of this podcast is to talk to Microsoft and Nerdio about what's happening with AVD, and we've got a somewhat short list of things. Let's start with the February updates, going from the bottom up. First one is Teams optimizations for Mac OS, now in public preview. Rob, what is Teams optimization in general, and why does it need to be enabled for a Mac?
Yeah, if you think about it, Teams, like a lot of collaborative type solutions, they're very chatty. They store a lot of data so that they can run very smoothly. Some of that cache becomes difficult. So there's certainly some ways that we run into in VDI realm where we need to redirect personal data into the session. That's one aspect, right? So that it feels like you're on a regular PC. That's one piece. And we work hand in hand with some of these optimizations with FSLogix to store that stuff and bring it back in various connections. The other side of what Teams does is that Teams is a communication solution, just like we're using here from a Zoom perspective, and putting that in a non-persistent environment that lives in Azure, but the desktop, the users connecting from maybe 15 milliseconds away, and they're displaying it differently. All of those things become difficult. What the Teams optimization does is it does kind of a peer-to-peer syncing of that audio video channel stream, so that it can work inside a VDI world. By default, it's just going to run in the desktop and then deliver the audio and video through the session. In optimization world here from Teams, what we're talking about is connecting those two channels, the local device that the user's on and the VDI session, and finding that there are codecs and things that allow us and resources to be able to play that on the local endpoint. Then the desktop just gets out of the way and lets Teams connection happen peer-to-peer. And the announcement here is that we've enabled this now for Mac OS. Again, public preview. Usually the way public preview works for AVD is about a month later. And then we should be able to have that same thing that today we only have in Windows 10 and 11.
And Rob, I love that you used two things. One, you talked about that usability to make it feel like you're in that non-persistent virtual desktop, but the stuff you need is coming with you from your local device, so that you don't feel like a second-class user in a non-persistent virtual desktop. That's often overlooked. And then you mentioned the Teams offloading of the protocol, and you used a measurement of 15 milliseconds. Usually 15 milliseconds, right? As IT guys, we get all excited. That's awesome. But in this case, we're still having to go extra hop. So even at 15 milliseconds, if we're trying to do it in the virtual desktop, got the virtual desktop having to have the power to do it. Plus we've got an extra hop at 15 milliseconds. Even that's noticeable if we don't offload it. Is that what you see?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say you made fun of my milliseconds, and I apologize because I'm used to talking that way from Azure connection, so yeah, instead of saying 150, milliseconds or, whatever, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of that.
Well, and the fact you went straight to 150 or 120 or 200, that's when it becomes even weirder when you start talking about doing Teams and whether or not you can offload it or not, and all of a sudden it becomes pronounced and very noticeable whether you're doing it inside the desktop, the virtual desktop, or not. Greg, from a Nerdio perspective, is this just something that you guys get the benefit of in Nerdio, or is there above and beyond things that you guys are doing in Nerdio to make this problem less of an issue?
So with the Windows side, it's with Nerdio, it's a scripted action, and that may very well be how it turns out on the Mac side as well. And I'm highly, fairly sure that it'll get incorporated as soon as we can get it in the dev list to get done.
Well, and that's something to highlight about Nerdio too. Like Microsoft does what they do, and you guys don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? But then you take what they do and make it better, more manageable. Going back to the whole conversation of why you almost have to have a Nerdio-like product if you're going to tackle AVD, unless you got a staff of 10, all with great scripting knowledge to do it yourself.
Correct.
All right. Next announcement here is unassigning and reassigning personal desktops now generally available. Rob, I'm going to go back to you on that one because I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, in traditional ARM AVD, if I'm going to take a personal desktop, and the rest of the VDI world would call that a persistent desktop, and I want to reassign that to another user, today that's been very kind of cumbersome to be able to do. So now, be able to just kind of take this user, point to a different user, and now this VM becomes theirs. So let's say you had somebody, I don't know, maybe eventually will be good for like machine sharing, but for now I would call it more like a new employee is going to take over the resources of a previous employee. Maybe in some environments that could make sense. In some environments, what I just said sounds like a nightmare. The funny thing here is I would imagine, Greg, you're probably thinking, well, that's something we've kind of been able to do for a while now.
We have, yes, but it's nice to see it get deployed out of the portal. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a key point for what Nerdio does. Is some things eventually, we may natively, create that capability, and it might not be as good as the way that Nerdio does it already. But even then, Nerdio is probably doing other things to always kind of make the experience better. But that's a perfect example of something where if a customer told me 6 months ago they needed that, that's a Nerdio discussion.
It's funny as we're talking through this one, Rob, I'm having a history lesson go through my head. We had non-persistent, and then we had persistent and non-persistent, and then we had personal, which was like the personal VDIS stuff. And now personal is kind of pulled back a little bit, and it's more just making sure you map to the same machine. Okay, so as you pointed out, right? So you have Microsoft adding this to its functionality. Nerdio's had it for a while and probably more robust and more mature. And that's one of the things, right? Again, not to just keep bragging on Nerdio constantly, but the idea that Microsoft's going to do what they need to check boxes and make them good enough. But if you want it to be functional like you've gotten used to in other products, that's where Nerdio kicks in. Question for you guys. So this is like you have a non-persistent, and then you have now a personal. In the case of AVD or AVD with Nerdio, how much of that personal is going to be persistent, and how much of it can be just a non-persistent that's personally mapped to the same one each time, or both?
From a Nerdio perspective, it's about a 20% of the amount of the time that we see that, maybe a little less than that. Even when I was at Microsoft, we saw a big request for that. Especially in certain industries, so it's big when it's big, but it does kind of hover around the outskirts of the general AVD environment.
So Greg, which one? The idea that you have a non-persistent that's always mapped to the same non-persistent, or the idea that you have a persistent resident one that you're always going through and all your data and everything, all your files and everything is there?
Yeah, with Nerdio, it's a little bit of both because we've had that capability for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I think Greg, I think what you said there made a lot of sense. For the general customer, most people, if they're going to use persistent VMs, they want to keep as much personal stuff kind of out of it. Now, when it's developers, when it's certain use cases, I think it's critical that they get to do it that way where it's completely persistent. But I think today with container technology for profiles and Office being able to recache into the session, I think it really blurs the line as to what's personally assigned, I guess, in some ways.
Correct.
Okay, so the next one here, last one for February, network data for Azure Virtual Desktop user connections. Rob, back to you again. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, so something that, like, say in a Citrix environment for years you went without knowing hey, what's my round trip time, to know whether the client is the problem or to know whether there's a server back end issue. So one of the first places you want to look is, hey, what's that round trip time look like? And it, for as long as, say, Citrix was around, that took a long time before we really had that in, things like Director and whatever, where they could see that. Today we've kind of had some of those RDP metrics, and now we're pulling those into the session so that you can pull those through diagnostic data to know, the main one being round trip time for the user session.
Yeah, and that goes back to our conversation a few minutes ago around latency and 15 versus 150 and user experience, and all of a sudden you're in a hotel and you're getting 600, or maybe on an airplane and you're trying to work, you get 6, 7, 1300, whatever it is. Knowing that that's the scenario and that you don't have real virtual machine problems, you have network connectivity problems, and then the dreaded disconnects on top of that. Now you really got to have that data. Greg, is this something that Nerdio is benefiting from or already had or involved?
It's really great to see that getting added into the Azure Monitor side of the house, and because Nerdio does have, not Nerdio directly, but with our partnership with Sepago, does have the capability to collect that information. And doing it through the portal today with log analytics proper with insights, it doesn't require those customers to step up to an additional cost with the Sepago agent. So it's great to see that added finally.
Yeah. Bill Sutton, you've been hanging out listening to us. February, that's a wrap. Did you hear anything in there that makes you more interested in using Nerdio and AVD together as a way to solve problems?
Well, Greg may have said this, but I think that when it comes to the network data for Azure Virtual Desktop, I think Nerdio has some capabilities of getting some of this data directly from Azure, as well as through a third party partner of theirs. I think Sepago. Is that right, Greg?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, I thought so based on our discussions before. The other items are interesting. That just demonstrates what you guys have been saying, which is Microsoft continues to up the game and catch up with some of the capabilities that are available in other products, and getting AVD into the higher levels of capability.
So, Bill, I know you've been around, and Greg, obviously you've been around for a while, and of course, Rob and I have been around forever. Does Microsoft have a huge benefit here of knowing what the important pieces are they need to be working on, whereas for years and years and years, say like a Citrix had to just stumble through year to year to year trying to figure out what was important?
So funny thing is Nerdio has a very, very tight relationship with the Microsoft development organization on AVD. And so quite often we catch wind of it and come out with having that feature included in or complementing the feature when it comes out, when Microsoft releases it. So we do have that great relationship, and we have a little bit of insight and help not only provide feedback, but take feedback from Microsoft on both sides.
But Rob, when you think about all the features that have come and gone, say in a Citrix world, and the time that was spent developing something that's irrelevant now, it's like I guess learning to use my analogy here. You're learning to high jump the modern way versus doing it the old way and having to learn the new way after years of crashing onto the ground the old way. That make any sense?
Yeah, you definitely, some of the things we do today are things that, we're kind of a sunrise before, as far as features that, have already predated. And I think, we see that with Nerdio as well. Some of the features, or features that they've had in their core product that, have come out natively, but, and then sometimes it's something like being able to have round trip times from the client. So the client needed a kind of a listener. I mean, the second that comes out, a lot of times, Nerdio seems to be kind of testing those features out a month ahead of time. So it's interesting. Sometimes some of the new features, Greg, you could probably talk to these things better than I can in a lot of cases.
So, guys, the next section here, we talk about March updates, and here's what changed in March. I'm reading this word for word the way they say it here. Number one, FS Logix version 2201 is now generally available. Guys, I still run into people that don't understand the FS Logix history, which I guess they shouldn't if they don't eat, sleep, breathe this stuff. But the FS Logix piece is an entitlement for anyone who owns the, O365 license, E3 or higher gets FS Logix.
Yeah, there's
Rob?
a few ways.
Yeah. I thought it was maybe the M365 license.
I want to say it's down to the O365 for Outlook cache. I
Well,
don't think. You guys tell me. I don't know.
It's M365, but some of the names change. Sometimes it's E entitlements, sometimes it's G entitlements, depending on whether they're government or education or whatever. But there's a variety of different ways that you get entitlements to profile as well as WVD. They basically go hand in hand. If you're entitled to one, you have the other, and that includes the ability to use FS Logics in an on-premise environment if you needed to do that as well.
Okay, so to wrap this up, because I probably talked through it and didn't make it make sense. I always thought it was O365 or M365. What Greg highlighted and Rob doubled down on is the idea if you have M365, probably E or E3 or higher. If you have the right to AVD, about one old school, then you have the right to FS Logics with the underlying Microsoft pieces for in the cloud as well as on premises, wherever that on premises is, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, to me, in the lunch I had today here, I'm in Chicago, went to the client, and they're all about login times and Outlook cache, and they were talking about FS Logics, but they didn't really understand the history of how it is really evolved. For one reason was to solve that whole Outlook cache and how to do it the right way in a supported way.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think that was a big critical component for the WVD solution too, was to have a solid profile answer.
Greg, on the Nerdio side, anything special that you guys do above and beyond that makes FS Logics even more implementable and maintainable?
Most definitely. So if you look at FS Logics soup to nuts, you have everything from adding your storage, say Azure Files Premium, and getting that set up and joined to your domain, which we fully automate that and make that simple for your the users, all the way to not only the standard FS Logics deployment, but we also have implemented FS Logics application masking configuration from directly inside of Nerdio itself, with a little bit more of a simplified interface to that, to allow those customers to hide applications on their images from certain users as needed.
Well, we didn't really talk about that at all, right? That came up at lunch as well as an app layering technology, and it's not really app layering; it's app masking, but still applicable. And so it sounds like Nerdio recognizes the value of that, adds some functionality to it, make it easier.
Absolutely.
Before we go further, the next topic is going to come back to what I'm going to talk about here. Is there a difference, Rob, between the RDP that comes with like an RDS server these days and the RDP that comes out of AVD? Are they alike, or is there special secret sauce going into the AVD one?
Yeah, great question. The initial kind of product line for the we call it kind of the side-by-side protocol, because it's slightly different than your traditional RDP. Initially, we went down the path of making it even TCP based instead of UDP based. That was important for some things that had to happen, like we have something called reverse connect, so that direct connections don't happen to your VMs and your apps, so everything stays pristine and secure in the data center. Other things have kind of, in some ways, regular RDP stayed ahead because we had to go back to make RDP kind of completely secure from the ground up. And as such, some things have kind of been lagging that we've needed in the AVD side, and one of which you're probably just about to mention, I guess.
Well, so I guess the answer to your question is it's the opposite of my question is the opposite of what I thought, where AVD kind of was a leader, and then you had to go back to the RDP that's been built into Windows for all these years, and now you're bringing that security features forward into the AVD version of it. Yeah.
Like take for example, when we went to TCP, a lot of our multimedia redirections, well, all of them, were based on the UDP kind of stack, and so without that, we kind of pulled the undercarriage out from underneath when we went into AVD, WVD, and now here we are just announcing in that middle box there the fact that multimedia redirection is in public preview, and it's not the full blown multimedia redirection because that can mean a lot of different things, but in this case, audio video kind of streaming gets redirected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you basically covered it there. Greg, where does that fit into your world?
Yeah, it's the connection piece. So it's a little outside of kind of what we do, but we certainly appreciate those enhancements because we hear them from customers as well to pass them along to Microsoft.
Well, I'm glad you kind of said it that way because in my world, when I see Nerdio, I think about deploy, manage, maintain. But when I see, what Microsoft's doing in tandem, which is around user experience, you kind of get your chocolate and your peanut butter, or your peanut butter and jelly, whatever example you want to use between both companies. One's fixing and making the deployment management better. Meanwhile, the other's making the user experience better. And between the two of them, you are attacking the need.
Absolutely.
Okay, last one here from March, and then we'll be done. Live captions with Teams on Azure Virtual Desktop now generally available. Rob, live captions?
Pretty self-explanatory, right? Of course, Microsoft, we're very focused on, providing services into all of the solutions to help communicate for everybody, and being able to do live captions, so capturing audio in the session, redisplaying that is a kind of a critical piece. So, generally available. There will be almost hundreds of various little pieces inside of Teams that you'll see kind of, pop out, depending on when the Teams team does pieces that the AVD pieces that can plug into it. And, this is one to make it, try and bring it on par with the way the desktop app works today.
So I'm really dumb here. Give me an example of what a Teams caption is.
So like you could caption, you can pull in audio stream and display it as words, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's the translation into I forget what we call that, but anyway, so you're using a virtual desktop, an AVD virtual desktop, and the Teams is being offloaded, and we need to be able to grab the captions, the text.
Think of it like closed captioning for Teams meetings.
Yeah. When it's being offloaded or not, does it matter?
I don't believe that it matters. You'll get a display, that could be improved if it's redirected as well.
Right.
Okay. So, Greg, just another thing that Microsoft's working on that you guys are going to benefit from as a Nerdio AVD deployment.
I believe so. It'll bring additional value for sure across the entire spectrum of AVD users for sure.
Yeah. And I was trying to explain to someone last week that, it's not just Microsoft, it's Nerdio attacking the management and implementation challenges of AVD. Meanwhile, you got Microsoft who wants the user experience to be good enough where people adopt and they drive that consumption in AVD. If I go back to 12 years ago when Rob and I worked together, my biggest competition was actually Microsoft because they really wanted SCCM and deployment solutions to work. Now they seem to be all in on fixing what needs to be fixed in AVD to make it a near native experience so that the adoption happens in Azure. Robert, does that story resonate with you? The old days of kind of competing with Microsoft for virtual versus deployed. Now everybody's heading towards the virtual world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, when you think about what it took to build an on-prem environment of any kind of VDI, but especially if you were going to try and build it native Microsoft RDP without the benefit of a Citrix, it was going to be a really, really monumental challenge. And, unless they were just a couple terminal servers with just a little bit, you saw very few usage without vendors to improve it. I think as we shift to cloud and you think about all of that difficulty to build all that back end infrastructure, goes away in AVD, right? I don't have to worry about brokers or databases or load balancers or web front ends or, any of that, right? All that gets handled for me. And yet there's still some things that, although the back end gets built, you still have to, administrate it. So there's still a learning curve there. I think it just allows companies to be more focused on their app delivery and what their delivery and their, the robustness of that, as opposed to having to build the infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, normally I ask people for their final word, but I think Rob just gave us his. That was a good summary of what's happening. And anything else, Rob?
No.
Okay.
I think you're right, though. That's the thing that I think folks are surprised at how fast they can deploy, in a cloud-based environment.
I think the fact that it's cloud, I think the fact that they've got some helpers, the fact that they've seen, the years and years of other people fixing and changing and evolving stuff, and they get to just jump in where they're jumping in. I think that goes a long way towards the speed of adoption, or the speed of the increase in Microsoft's ability to come to market with this and customer adoption. And Greg, anything else from this list or from a Nerdio perspective you'd want to leave us with?
So one added thing is Nerdio just recently released a version 4.0 update with our standard and a premium edition, providing some additional features and functionality on the premium side to make some additional things within AVD a lot easier, and just kind of give you one aspect of it. We've built in some capability to help monitor and manage your log analytics workspace for those agents reporting back and setting your retention times, your counter times, as well as providing some interesting percentages of how much data is being stored for each one of those. So it's a new update, and I look forward to getting that out in the market here in the coming months.
I think we did a webinar with you the other day. I don't know if we covered that or not, but certainly maybe a webinar to cover all the most recent announcements from you guys.
We did not, because it was not officially released at the time.
Okay. All right. Well, then we need to get one scheduled. That would be great.
We could do that.
Bill Sutton, we covered a lot. We kind of excluded you from some of it. I know you were listening. We talked about February. Anything in March? Anything overall that you'd want to talk about or ask about?
I just kind of
these two smart guys on the call.
Yeah, I just kind of soaking it all in here, Andy, and all good stuff. I as you know, I've been trying to get as up to speed as I can on AVD, and built a couple of environments, and certainly have seen the benefits of Nerdio, and haven't used it yet myself, but one of the benefits that Greg spoke to is the ability to very easily create Azure files and get them joined to the domain. When I did that natively, it was very cumbersome, a lot of PowerShell, things like that, stuff that I'm not typically used to. My consultants are, but not me. So a lot of value Nerdio adds, and it's great to see Microsoft continue to expand the capabilities of the platform.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I appreciate you jumping on. We'll do it again in about a month, and we'll talk about what happened in April.
Yeah.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks a lot.